All right, dear Nigerians, welcome to the digital living room. As I always say, take your shoes off, keep your socks on, drag your feet against my soft and plush carpets, and take a seat on my plush couches. Get comfortable because we're about to chat. This recording is just a few days before the 2024 presidential election. So, of course, I'm going to record something to my dear Nigerians, something about this topic of election and how we treat it and what to do with it and how to be informed as we go out and vote if you are a Nigerian American and you have the ability to vote. Guys, here is your election 2024 guide. Hashtag, it is crazy not to vote. All right. But before we move forward, I want to welcome our guests. If you are new here and are wondering what is Dear Nigerians, Dear Nigerians is a podcast dedicated to millennials and Gen Z of a Nigerian-influenced background. I'm very specific about saying Nigerian-influenced background because, to be quite frank, in this day and age, 2024, with a lot of movement, with a lot of global awareness, with a lot of Nigerians being across the globe, myself included, being Nigerian is not a monolith. It means multiple things to be a Nigerian. You might have been born in the country. You may have not been born in the country. You may, relate with some tribe or some culture that stems from Nigeria. You may be as American as it comes, or as German as it gets, or as British as it gets, but something in your veins, something in your DNA is still Nigerian. I'm talking to you. This podcast is dedicated to you for us to come together and talk about the things that are uniquely Nigerian, uniquely us as it relates to our backgrounds, our beliefs, our traditions, our hangups, our positive things, our negative things. I want to talk about them and use this as a platform to explore their beauty, but also question the things that we dare not question so that we can become the better versions of ourselves. All right. If you are new, I welcome you. All right. Let's talk about this election. And specifically, I'm talking about the U.S. election 2024. Many Americans, maybe if not most Americans, are torn about how to vote this year simply because we don't see a platform that really and fully mirrors our values. And the same goes for Nigerian Americans who have the right to vote. In some cases, you might support a platform's ideals and policies, but the front man or front woman for the platform doesn't really resonate with you, or quite frankly, you have a deep dislike for the person. Maybe you don't align with their personality, their way of interaction, their way of speaking, or you've read some things in their history, or you've seen it just yesterday in the news that let you know for sure that they don't carry your same values as individuals. So it becomes very, very hard to vote. My goal for this episode is, first of all, to encourage you to vote. If you are out there and you have the ability to vote, but you have decided you're not going to partake because you look at both sides and you don't like it, I want to encourage you to vote. The second is I want us to have a fact-based conversation about topics that influence our vote uniquely, specifically topics for people with a Nigerian influence identity that influence where our votes go. I also want to share some information that can help to inform your vote. And lastly, I want to give you a Dear Nigerians voting survival kit. It is uniquely from Dear Nigerians to you, Dear Nigerians. All right. Let's start with this. We're talking about voting, and I want to bring to play your personal responsibility. I'm not talking to Americans as a whole. I am talking to Americans who are Nigerian. Whether you're Nigerian American or American Nigerian, there's two differences in those things. But I want to talk to you specifically. There's the ability to come to this nation and have the ability to vote. It is a great privilege and a great responsibility. Yesterday I spent some time at my daughter's school, and in one of their class exercises, they were singing a song, and you've probably heard the song before. The song goes, "This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, da 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 da," and so on and so forth, right? And that's a song that Americans typically sing when they get exposed to it when they're young. I was exposed to it when I was young, coming to school here in America. And now my daughter has been exposed to it as a young child. And they were singing that and pointing to the flag of the USA. And I have to be honest, I enjoyed that moment. The moment resonated with me because I've been a schoolgirl in the US singing that song or learning about the song. But I have to be honest with you, every time I hear that song, there is a little bit of imposter syndrome that comes into me. Whether or not it's right, I still have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I know fully I wasn't born in this country, right? Now, I wasn't born in this country, but I can come here and sing "This land is your land, this land is my land," from California to the New York Islands. And you can say whatever you want about, things that Nigerians can struggle with in this country, economic access or even racism, right? But the fact that you can come to this country, become a citizen, and have the right to vote as someone who was not even born here, it is a communication that this land is your land. And because this land is your land, the privileges it provides you, you have to carry that responsibility. And that is the same that goes for voting. Say what you want to say about America. This is a great country. The things that Nigerians typically find baffling, especially if they're coming directly from Nigeria to the States, for example, the individual liberties, the freedom of expression, the law and due process, the open-mindedness of Americans. Sometimes those things can baffle Nigerians, but those are the things that make this country great. And having the ability to vote gives you the opportunity to help steward where those things go over time. And personally, for me, I know I carry that with such responsibility. Like, I voted yesterday and I didn't realize how how the weight of voting would, how much my mind would go into the weight of voting, into thinking about the weight of voting while I was at my little booth yesterday. And I was like, I was about to just go and start doing my thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is very serious, Aramide. This is very serious. And I was voting as someone who had sang "This land is your land, this land is my land" yesterday, but felt a little bit of imposter syndrome because I know the land my ancestors left for me. It wasn't this. It wasn't a land that the whole world looks at and tries to follow. It wasn't the land with many freedoms that have made people great in this country. It wasn't this. But now I have this, and I get to say this land is your land, this land is my land. And if I'm given the opportunity to vote, I will steward that opportunity well. And dear Nigerians, if you're listening to me and you have the ability to vote and you are not doing it, you are wasting your opportunity. You are wasting your privilege. And I want to encourage you to pick up that responsibility to vote. Now, I know I'm speaking to young people too, right? I'm speaking to Gen Z, I'm speaking to millennials. So because of that, I want to spend some time just having some conversation that can help inform your vote. Okay. I want to first set the stage. On this election 2024 ballot, we have a couple parties. First, we have Kamala Harris representing the Democrats, and she is running with Tim Walz as a vice president. Then there is Donald Trump, who is representing the Republican side, with J.D. Vance as his vice president. And let's not forget, there's actually a third contender on the ballot, running on an independent platform. His name is Robert F. Kennedy. He is part of the Kennedy family. The Kennedy family is a well-respected family in American politics, but he is on the ballot. So there's three on the ballot. However, knowing how American politics goes, knowing how elections have gone from time after time, the two contenders typically end up being the Republican and the Democrat. So I'm going to talk specifically about those two in this episode. I want to have this conversation now, speaking from my perspective. And the first thing I want to do is start with love. Let's start with love when it comes to these political candidates. Aramide, what does love have to do with politics? I want to start with looking at these individuals with a heart of love. And doing that, I want to actually look at them as individual people outside of the platforms they represent. And I want to share what I like about them. Now, elections are not meant to be a personality contest, although in some cases it can feel like it. Also, the presidency is a formal and professional office. So you might argue that a president's personal life should not get in the way of their ability to make sound judgments for the nation when they're in the office. But who these people are as individuals, their cultural identity or experiences, their influences, the people that have deeply informed their minds and influenced their formations, influenced their character, it all influences the way they perceive things and the side they might lean towards when issues are on ground and the way they carry themselves. It's important to have this conversation because it forces us to look outside of the platforms they're representing and pay attention to the people, right? Now, let's start with Kamala Harris. These are things that I really like about Kamala Harris. The first thing is multiculturalism. Uh, Multiculturalism is not something that Kamala Harris just supports. It is something she embodies through and through. She's got a Jamaican-born father, an Indian mother, and by the way, a Nigerian American nephew, because her niece married a Nigerian American. And so you have someone that really represents, I don't mean to use this term offensively, but the hodgepodge, the mix that America truly is. America is increasingly a multicultural country, right? And we love to talk about Nigerians. Say, people might ask, what's Nigerian culture like? And the appropriate answer to people is there's no such thing as Nigerian culture because there's so many tribes. America is quickly becoming a place where there's no such thing as American culture because there's so many different groups of people that come here and have called this place home. And it's not only that they call this place home, but they're making valuable inputs to this nation. So those inputs, those investments keep them grounded to say this land truly is my land. And you need a leader, I believe, for America. A country like America needs a leader that really understands the multicultural nature of the nation and the increasing multiculturalism that's going to be in the U.S. And Kamala, it's not only that she tolerates that, she embodies it. And even in relation to being multicultural and embodying multiculturalism, I think Kamala, well, it's not even I think, Kamala for sure, also represents something that is true of America, that America is a religiously diverse nation. This nation is founded on Christian principles. And so when you hear people battling about things from a Christian perspective, I completely understand it because of what this nation's foundations were. And the fact of the matter is that Christian foundation has created a nation that people of multiple religions can come and find home and find safety. And so you need a leader, I believe, that is not only tolerant of religious diversity, but as best way as possible can embody that. By the way, I hate the word religion, but this is the word that best helps people understand where I'm coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and use it. In the house that Kamala was raised in, she was exposed to Hinduism by her mother, exposed to Baptist Christianity from her father, and now she's married to a Jewish man and grown with him and helped him to raise his Jewish kids. It reflects the nation, quite frankly. And people of all faiths, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, people of all faiths bring value to this nation. I look at my life and the people in my life, if I look at my career specifically, that have added value, that have said things to me, that have made me really think deeply about how I see life. Not all of them are Christian like me. I've got people who are Jain. I know people who are Muslim. I know people who are atheists. And I can point at them and say, you added value to my life. So if I can say that about my life, how much more the nation, the value that people of all faiths can bring to the nation. You need a leader, I believe, you need a leader that is not just tolerant of religious diversity, but understands it innately. And I think that's who Kamala is. Okay? Here's another thing I like about Kamala. This is a woman that's done the work. Okay? Nothing has been handed over to her. And I can say that with confidence, not knowing her personally, not even knowing about her father or mother. I can say that with confidence because she is a Black woman that has grown from doing the grunt work and working in, the district attorney's office in California, starting her career there, and then eventually becoming the district attorney of the city and council of San Francisco, the first Black woman to do that, and then becoming the U.S. Senator for California. She was the second African American woman to do that and the first South Asian American person to do that. And then she eventually became vice president. To do that as a Black woman, you cannot be weak, you cannot be unawares, and nothing was handed over to you. I say that with confidence without knowing her well, as someone who's growing in the world of technology and knowing how just the sight of a Black face can really quickly elicit people's biases without them even knowing. This woman's been able to have this type of career, and it says something about her. And I do like that about her. And here's the other thing I like about Kamala. She is a mom, and not just a mom, but also a stepmom. And you might say, what does that mean for the presidency? Maybe it doesn't impact, policies that she tries to, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I do think there's value in having a mother as the leader of the nation. There's value in having a stepmom, someone who's had to do the hard work of blending into a family with its own flow and becoming the matriarch of that family in a way that is authentic, legitimate, and also respectful of the existing culture in the family. You have someone who's had to walk that over multiple years. And I don't know if I can't say she's done it perfectly or imperfectly. I do not know her personal life, but the experience she's had to have had as a mom and a stepmom, I think there's something powerful there that we should pay attention to. She's a highly nuanced person to me. And one of the things I actually do not like about the media engine and what it's created about Kamala Harris is the idea that, she has, the idea that she doesn't have this big personality. I see her and I see a nuanced woman. I see a woman that sometimes has intellectual thought, sometimes wants to chill and have, easy conversation and cultural conversation. So she might talk a certain way with people of a certain culture because she's relating with them. I don't see that as fake. I don't see that as not having a personality. I see that as being a nuanced person. And unfortunately, I think for her, she's just that for me, that feedback, kind of attacking her personality. It's not a reflection of her. It's actually a reflection of society, that society does not know what to do with nuanced women. If you are not highly sexual, hypersexual, if you are not braggadocious, if you are not the angry Black woman, society doesn't know where to place you. And so what happens is that they just judge your personality without really giving specific reasons. And I see that's happening with Kamala. All right, let's go on to Donald Trump. Okay. These are the things that I like about Donald Trump. And I really do wish these things were more in conversation as when it comes to taking a look at the candidates and looking at them outside of their platforms, looking at them just from the perspective of who they are as individuals. Here's the first thing I like, and this is kind of biased, but it has to do with his personality. I'm going to shock you. Do you know that I have the same personality type as Donald Trump? Now, that's not something some people might want to say out loud, so let me explain, okay? A couple years ago, I took a test. It's the Enneagram test. You might have heard of it. It's a test that has grown in popularity over the past couple of years. And I took the test and I read the results just in relation to myself. And I actually thought this is the most accurate personality test that I've ever taken because it resonated with me. Now, when you take the Enneagram test tells you your personality types. And I am type 8. Type 8 on the Enneagram chart is a challenger. And according to character and personality analysts, people like Winston Churchill, Donald Trump, Serena Williams, Martin Luther King, they are all challengers. And textbook definition of a challenger, a Enneagram type 8, are people who are self-confident, extremely strong, assertive, and sometimes might appear domineering or intimidating. They're protective. They're resourceful, straight-talking, and decisive, but they can also be egocentric and domineering. When an Enneagram is healthy, 8s are self-confident, they're strong, they're assertive, but when they're not healthy, they can defy any attempt to control them, and that can lead them to be ruthless people. They can begin to act like dictators, and they can be hard-hearted, immoral, and even potentially violent, okay? That's when an Enneagram type 8 is unhealthy. And believe me, all personality types have a version for when they're healthy and a version for when they're not healthy. Okay. Now, here's why I say I like it. Is it because I'm biased? Oh, he's like me. Nah, not really. But because I understand some aspects of my personality. And I know there's something in me, if I look at my life experiences, there is something in me that can be ruthlessly resilient, especially when I believe that I am standing for something that is worth standing for. Something of greater purpose, something of greater value. And I think if that is in Donald Trump, it means if there's something of greater value, something of a higher purpose that he can capture and support. And I do think there are some things he's willing to support. Whether or not he believes in them is a question. But there are some things he's willing to support as by matter of the fact of the platform he represents. That if He's willing to support those things of greater purpose. He will be ruthlessly resilient in making sure those things stand. And that's something that I like. Here's another thing that I like about him. Just the sheer grit of the man. Okay? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't care what you say about this man, but I want to go back to the day when we all saw on TV an attempt on his life. And we saw him duck down very quickly, and we saw him get up, and we see the Secret Service, who were so impressive to me, by the way, in the way they treated that in that instance. We saw the Secret Service crowd themselves around him and create a human shield around him. And the way he looked up, blood spilling from his ear, and putting up a fist in the air saying, fight, fight. I'm going to be honest with you. As a human being, as a woman, as a mother, as a Black woman in technology, I needed to see that. I needed to see that you can live. I needed to see this is what it looks like to fight to the death, if it takes that, when you are fighting for something to believe in. There are not too many people in the world that are living for something truly worth living for. A lot of people are waiting for something to push them and pull them. But for you to have sheer force for something, sheer grit for something, and fight to the death for it, and even while someone tries to bring that death to you, you still stand up and fight to communicate, I will not back down. I think you need to see that. I think everybody in the world needs to see that. And I do like that. Here's the other thing I like about him. Why is it that no one calls this man old? You can call him overweight. You can call him unattractive. You can call him crass, whatever. No one calls him old. But he is 2 years to 80, right? I also think that's a good example, right? Like people are saying, he's crass, the way he talks, ew. But nobody is saying, you old, senile, and tired man, go and sit down somewhere. No one's saying that. Why? Because of the sheer force of might that he's working with, wherever that might comes from. But I do love seeing that, because actually I'm in a point in my life right now where my daughter's going to school, as I said, and quite frankly, we've placed her in a school. We've made some unique decisions about her education. And right now, her teachers are all 60 years old plus. One of them is 65. Another one is 84. Another one is 94. And I don't remember the age of the other one, but she's at least in her 80s. They're all women. And these women are senior citizens. And all these women, senior citizens, are the educators currently that we've picked for our first child. And as I was in her school yesterday, I was musing with another parent about these women and their ages. And we were kind of joking around like, can we be people who at 90 and 91 and whatever, young families are depending on us to give value to them. It's a good example to see that being aged, being in your later years, being in the sunset of your life doesn't mean you have to go sit down and be quiet and tired. You can certainly choose that. And you can certainly choose to add value to other people's lives in a much quieter way, and definitely in a much more private way, not so much in this position of presidency. You can definitely choose to do that. But I do think it is valuable for us to see the image of someone becoming 80 and not tiring. You can be an influencer in the lives of young people. And quite frankly, every individual needs to see that. That's what I'm going to say about Donald Trump. Now, love is not complete without telling truth. My conversation about these individuals, these candidates, and speaking to them with the heart of love is not complete without speaking truth. And speaking truth has to be clear. And we have to be very honest about what about them might be unsavory or unfavorable. Let's go to Kamala. At times in interviews, Kamala has come off as evasive. And an evasive person, for me, someone who comes off as evasive can also be someone who shapeshifts, right? I'm not attacking her personality. I'm not talking about, being, formal when you're speaking to the press and then being a little bit more relaxed and, let me use the term, urban in your dictionary when you're talking to a certain audience, people who look like you, talk like you, feel like you. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way she talks about issues. The border of the United States and immigration and what she wants to purport when it comes to immigration. She can come off as evasive. And for me, someone who is evasive is someone that can lean into shape shifting, You might have a certain face during your run for presidency, and then you get the presidency, and then you shift. And we just, if that's true, we would just have to live with wherever she shifts to. Okay. The other thing I can see about her sometimes, and it's also in related to this, maybe her input in interviews doesn't come off as prepared. Let's just say that. Donald Trump, what are things that are unfavorable about him? Well, let me just ask some rhetorical question. Why does a presidential candidate have a criminal case on his back? Why was there an insurrection? Why are there women that are saying he violated them? Right? Those are legitimate questions to say. And also, there are people that can say in business, he's ruthless in business to the point of cheating people. There are people with that testimony of him. And let's actually talk about business and money and all of that. One of the things I wanted to say that I like about Donald Trump is that he comes from generational wealth. Not necessarily that I think generational wealth is better, right? But I do think, especially as people of Nigerian-influenced identity, people who we don't see a lot of generational wealth. I don't know anyone in my life who is Nigerian and has generational wealth. I know people who have parents who make a lot of money or who themselves make a lot of money. But dear Nigerians, we have a lot to do in terms of creating generational wealth that your granddaddy, daddy, you, and your children's 2 generations down are already taken care of. I don't know a lot of people like that. And I wanted to say that I liked that about Donald Trump, right? So that it's a good example to look at. But having heard some testimonies, researched them by myself, some testimonies about people who do business with him, I don't have the perspective that he is someone who comes from generational wealth and cares for the rest of the world to learn how to build generational wealth. I don't get that perspective. In fact, I get the opposite. Okay. So that is what I would say in terms of like, okay, here's where these are unsavory things to me about both candidates. All right, let's move on to the next part of this conversation. We have talked about the candidates as individuals, but elections in the United States are about platforms. So you cannot just look at the individual and ignore the platform that they are representing. This is where I say, dear Nigerians, you have to do your research before voting. You have to research what the platforms are pushing, the policies they support, the language they are using, the individuals that they are using to purport that language, and then determine, do any of these things reflect your values? Keep in mind, though, that platforms are very changeable, okay? There's actually a podcast that I listened to from me as an individual. This podcast was the most helpful conversation I've ever listened to about politics. It's the podcast hosted by Lecrae, who's a hip hop artist. He's a hip hop artist that believes in Christ. And he invited to the podcast, that interview, he invited 2 individual people, 2 Black men, well-educated, well-spoken of, but both of them are of different parties. One was Democratic and one was Republican. And one of the interviewees in that episode, I actually invite you to go listen to that episode because it educates you very well about the United States election system. And I love that it came from Black men. I just do. I love that it came from Black men. So I want to invite you, dear Nigerians, to go look up that episode with Lecrae talking about election with 2 Black men, one being Democratic, one being Republican. One of the things that an interviewer said there was that the primary purpose of a platform is to win an election. I learned that from him, and it made me think a lot about what that means. A platform, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, that party's primary goal is to win seats in office for specific people that can push a specific agenda or worldview or perspective into American politics, into the American legal system, right? I thought about that, and I've never really thought about platforms in that way at all. But when I saw that, a couple of things made sense to me, right? If you have a platform, an entity whose goal it is to win seats, well, you do whatever it takes to win those seats, right? And that leaves platforms liable to be changeable, to quote unquote pander, though pander is an ugly word, to pander and say what they need to say to get the majority vote. All right? You have to pay attention to that. Pay attention to the platforms, okay? But also keep in mind that these platforms, so they have a language and they're giving you certain promises. Their goal is to win seats, and they can renege on some of those promises if some of them will make them lose seats. Please keep that in mind. It is the nature of the game. Now, I want us to research the platform. I want us to talk about the platforms. But before I do that, I want us to go into talking about the platform by highlighting the issues that typically come up when it comes to Nigerian Americans and where the Nigerian American vote goes. All right. Let's get down to this. How to vote. You've got to understand what your values are. I'm going to first start talking about what my personal values are, but I want to actually take my values, and actually kind of balloon them up to what typically tends to be topics of interest for people with a Nigerian influence identity. I think it's important for this episode. All right. So here's the first thing. Here's me talking and telling you this is my values. As a Nigerian American, Black, Christ following mom who is a technologist and a creative, here are the things I value. I value the ability for an individual to originate from anywhere in the world, whether it's a positive place or not, whether it's a rich place or not. The ability for that individual to originate from that place and then find the means to legally settle themselves in a land that secures their human dignity, their human rights, and their ability to achieve their full potential. I value that. And that story, that value has come to life in my life in so many ways. Here's another thing I value. I value the life of children. I've always loved children. Since childhood, I've always had a soft spot for babies. I always admired other people's babies. And I also wondered, oh gosh, is it possible that I admire other people's babies because I myself, I'm not a mother, so I don't see the dirty parts of being a mother. But now I am a mother. And yes, I've seen the rough parts of motherhood, and I probably will continue to see them, right? But the rough parts of motherhood are far overweighed by the beautiful parts of motherhood. I doubled down on that love for children even more now being a mother. Being a parent, it is the most profound responsibility I think any individual can take. But on the other side of that, it is the most beautiful opportunity to steward a human life, to see the beauty of a human being vulnerable, but then growing into their powers, to create a safe place for those precious little human beings. I love that. And I think parenting is the biggest opportunity. I value that. I value equality and human dignity. I value respect of human dignity regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of creed, regardless of identity, regardless of health history. This is something very important and personal to me. Regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of identity. I don't care where you fall in the different lines. I have to treat you like a human. And I have to treat you as an equal when it comes to your right to life, period. And your right to have a life with dignity, period. Okay? I value freedom. I value the ability for every single individual to have the right to conduct business, social service, or their personal relationships, so on and so forth, in a way that does not violate their own personal values, whether those values stem from their own family history, their education, their own faith. So in light of this, I also value the right for every human being to evolve and change their minds and therefore their values. I also value the ability for an individual to have a right to a respectable life without their own personal life and freedoms being infringed upon by others as they exercise their own rights. That's very complicated. But all I'm trying to say is I value the ability to have a right to a respectful life and to allow my neighbor beside me to have a respectful life as long as him exercising his rights don't infringe upon my own rights. That's all I'm saying. I value having awareness of the world. Being born in Nigeria, moving to the United States, I am not permitted to have a closed-minded view about people in the world. I may not be familiar with everything in every part of the world, or even Nigeria in and of itself, but I value having awareness of the world and value for people who are coming from places that we're not familiar with. And I also value the ability for every individual to have the capacity to serve the world and use their abilities to uplift the world through business, faith, and public service. Those are my values. Now, me saying those are my values, I have to look at both platforms and decide what topics really, really are of interest to me in terms of what the platforms are saying about those topics. I'm not saying there's any topic that's not important, but what are my priorities, right? For me, and I think these priorities actually reflect some of Nigerian Americans' priorities. Correct me if I'm wrong. Message me. Say, Aramide, you missed it. So here are the priorities that I think. Immigration. I want to know what the platforms say about immigration. 2, I want to say what the platform says about women's reproductive rights, allowances, or quite frankly, abortion. I want to know what the parties say about family support and parental rights. I want to know what the parties have to say about children. And lastly, I want to know what the parties have to say about innovation and entrepreneurship. Those were my priorities. I want to know specifically on these 5 things: immigration, reproductive rights, family support and parental rights, children, innovation and entrepreneurship. What are you doing? What Democratic Party, what Republican Party are you saying? What are you saying you're going to focus on? Now, some people might ask me, especially if you are of a Nigerian background, what about economic access and poverty, right? I will say this, 2 things. The first thing is these things, the 5 things I've listed are priorities. They're not exclusive of each other. For example, I talk about family support. That's a priority, like family support. Part of family support has to do with family finances. And part of family finances has to do with taxes. And what does the government want to do about poverty? So while I don't list poverty as my priority, I know that the things that I have said about my priorities impact poverty. Okay? Some might say, okay, Aramide, why aren't you talking about climate change? It's not that I don't think climate change is important. If I had to pick 2, think like in economics. I studied this is where my economics major comes into play. Strip it down. If all I had in this world was to choose between climate policy and immigration, I'd lean on the side of immigration. Where to focus? Okay? If all I had the opportunity to choose was between family support and parental rights and climate change, I would lean on the side of family support and parental rights. I am not saying that climate change and addressing it is not important. I'm simply saying that these priorities weigh heavily for me, much more so than climate change. All right. Now let's take a look at the platforms. I want to look at the Republican platform. Let's start there. This is how you research. I went online and I said, what is the Republican platform for 2024? What are the promises that they're saying or the priorities that they have? What are they telling me they're going to work on if they were to have the office, the presidential seat and the Senate seats and the seats in Congress? What are we saying? Here's the Republican platform. I want to read the first paragraph and then go into what they're saying. To make clear our commitment, we offer the American people the 2024 GOP platform to make America great again. It is a forward-looking agenda that begins with following 20 promises that we will accomplish very quickly when we win the White House and Republican majorities in the House and Senate. Okay, here are their promises. Promise number 1, seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Number 2, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. Number 3, end inflation and make America affordable again. 4, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. 5, stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. 6, large tax cuts for workers and no taxes on tips. 7, defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. 8, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East, and build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over the entire country, all made in America. 9, end the weaponization of government against the American people. 10, stop the migrant crime epidemic, demolish the foreign drug cartels, crush gang violence, and lock up violent offenders. 11, rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., make them safe, clean, and beautiful again. 12, strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world. 13, keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. 14, fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age. 15, cancel the electric vehicle mandate and cut costly and burdensome regulations. 16, cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and any other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content for our children. 16, keep men out of women's sports. 17. Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. 18. Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. Next promise, secure our elections, including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. And the last one, unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. That is what the Republican Party is supporting in their own words. I read it word for word as is, added absolutely nothing to it. All right, let's go on to the words of the Democratic platform. I went online, I went on Google. Hey, Google, what is the Democratic platform for 2024? What are Democrats telling us they will work on if they win the presidency, the House of the seats in Congress, and the seats in Senate? Okay? The platform, the document for the Democrats is admittedly a little bit more complex in format than the Republican platform, their words, right? The Democratic Party did not have a list right at the top as far as these are our promises. They didn't do that. They're just saying, here's what we think our goals are. We're not promising you anything, but here's what we think our goals are. And I do think American people should pay attention to that. You have a party telling you these are our promises. You have another party telling you these are our priorities and this is what we're going to work on. Pay attention to that. However that reads to you is how it reads to you, right? So because the document from the Democrats is a little less assertive in its promises, I had to take that document because it's a longer one, right? And basically find what they're saying they're going to work on. And I used AI a little bit for this. I said, AI, take this long document and show me within this document what this platform is saying are its priorities. So here we go. Based on the Democratic platform document, here are the key priorities expressed in a clear and actionable format. Number 1, protect democracy and combat authoritarianism. That means strengthen democratic resilience, combat corruption, support human rights globally, including LGBTQI+ rights, uphold the democratic alliances, and strengthen global partnerships. Number 2, economic fairness and support of working families. Provide tax relief for working families, increase federal minimum wage, expand the child tax credit, and protect Social Security and Medicare. Reject policies that increase poverty and inequality. 3, climate action and environmental protection. Commit to global climate leadership, protect natural resources, aim for net zero emissions by 2050, and prioritize clean energy innovations and climate resilient infrastructure. 4, healthcare access and affordability. Protect and expand the Affordable Care Act. Cap prescription drugs. Tackle health disparities, particularly in maternal and reproductive health. Next one, gun safety and community protection. Support responsible gun ownership. Pass common sense gun control legislation and invest in public safety initiatives to reduce gun violence and crime. Next one, education and workforce development. Expand Pell Grants. Promote free community college and provide affordable college tuition for families earning under $125,000 per year. Strengthen workforce training for future job markets. Next, privacy and technology accountability. Pass data privacy legislation, protect youth from online crimes, regulate big tech, and ensure AI developments are safe, transparent, and equitable. Next one, reproductive rights and gender equality. Restore the right to choose, counter restrictive abortion laws, and support gender equality through the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. Next one, addressing systemic inequality and supporting minority communities. Implement Justice 40 to address environmental injustice, support minority serving institutions, and advance reparations studies. Next, strengthen national security, maintain a strong, modernized military, counter terrorism, and support allies with robust defense measures. Next one, end poverty and food insecurity. Continue programs like SNAP and earned income tax credit expansions, address homelessness, and invest in affordable housing. And last priority found within this document, there are other priorities, but last ones paid attention to, is to support veterans and military families. Okay? This means they want to increase funding for veteran healthcare, improve military housing, expand support for military families. These priorities focus on broad economic, social, and environmental benefits while protecting democratic principles and supporting vulnerable populations. All right. We have heard from both platforms as far as this is what they are either promising if you're on the Republican side, or if you what you are prioritizing and working on if you are on the Democratic side. Having heard that, I go back to the topics of interest that I said I want to prioritize for my ballot and for the way I vote, and also topics of interest that I think are topics of interest for Nigerians. The first is immigration. I'm an immigrant to the United States. Okay? I'm not someone who says my daddy came, my mommy came. My children will be those people to say my parents came to the U.S. when they were so and so. I came to the U.S. in 1998. I migrated here from Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria, migrated to this land, and my family, my parents were the two type of people that chose, regardless of what options were to come before them, they would go the legal routes to become members of this country, citizens of this country. And it was a painful process, a process that stole from them, but also gave them the ability to become natural citizens. And it took over a decade, guys, for that to happen, 10 years of their lives. And just for anyone who might be listening and may not understand immigration, waiting 10 years to become a citizen in America doesn't mean you can live your life anyhow while you wait for this piece of paper. No. Waiting 10 years to become a citizen in America impacts the amount of money you make. It impacts sometimes certain freedoms you can exercise. It impacts where you can travel at certain points in time. It impacts your health and well-being because you, don't let me cry. It impacts your health and well-being because in being someone who is not a citizen in this country, and I watched this from my parents, in being someone who's not a citizen in this country and wanting to earn money to take care of your family, there are people who can become sharks that take your labor, your skilled labor, and treat you as a slave because they know they hold the ticket to the thing you want the most. That is what immigration is for many people, okay? But the fact that you can take this journey and achieve it legally, it has impacted my life personally. And so this topic means a lot to me. And I believe it means a lot for many millennials and Gen Z with a Nigerian-influenced identity. So let's go back to the platforms. And the first thing that I see is highly problematic for me personally when I look at the Republican platform is the first two sentences. Seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. This, to me, sounds like a witch hunt for anyone that does not look American. I'm sorry. Now, whether or not Donald Trump believes it, whether or not some people in his party believes it, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how these words read. Seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. You could say seal the border and stop illegal migration. No, it's seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. That's highly problematic for me. Carry out the largest deportation operation in history. Okay, go ahead and do that. Do you want to use American taxes to do that? It deeply hurts, actually. Here's the next topic. Women's reproductive rights and allowances for abortion. I think this is where, for Nigerians, this topic is interesting because of maybe for some of us, our personal history to conceive children and birth children and the experiences we've had in hospitals having children, especially here in the States. And then the other part is faith. A lot of us come from a home of faith, and a large amount being Christians. And so we hear abortion and we understand the words of the Bible, right? I'm a believer in Christ, so I understand the words of the Bible, the words as it relates to murder, the words as it relates to the sanctity of human life. And the topic of abortion is immediately polarizing. And there are many Christians, because of that fact, will vote on a platform that's going to just take abortion out right away. Here's my perspective. And my perspective is a little nuanced. Okay? I do care for what both platforms are saying on this topic. but I care because of different reasons. Abortion is where Christians come to bat. And I actually hate that this is where Christians come to bat, because for me, Christians' language about this topic of abortion typically reflects what I think is problematic about how we go about things. Sometimes Christians have the tendency to take the letter of the law, thou shalt not murder, and use it in the most ungodly ways. I have seen said Christians, footage on YouTube, footage on CNN. I have seen said Christians who want to argue for the sanctity of life, take that scripture, go on picketing lines, and hurl insults and curses at the opposing side of the fence. If that's what you're doing, to me, you're simply looking for something to lord over people, something that authorizes you over people. And for some people, if they have to stoop so low and use the word of God to terrorize other people, they will do it. That's what I typically find about how Christians treat abortion. But let's go ahead and talk about abortion. For me, abortion, the topic of abortion has to do with, it's not a conversation about rights over my own body. It's a conversation about lordship. For me, Aramide, Christian woman. The conversation about abortion is a conversation about lordship. Who is the Lord over your body? And so, that being said, I have to look at the way both platforms are treating their conversations. For example, we've seen both platforms bring beautiful celebrities on stage, right? I remember I was watching Kamala Harris's convention in Houston, and she brought two beautiful young Black women that are well respected, and I started to listen. And I listened to the words of these young Black women, young Black female celebrities, and there was some rhetoric that immediately made me uncomfortable. The government is trying to trump over our rights, over our bodies. The government is trying to trump over our ability to control our own bodies. To me, as someone who looks at the topic of conversation as a conversation about lordship, that language, for me, it just falls flat. And here's why it falls flat. If I say Christ is the Lord over my body, it's not even just about abortion. It has to even do with like what I'm wearing, right? If Christ is the Lord over my body, I want even what I'm wearing on any day to reflect that he is the one that has lordship over my body. So I look at those beautiful women saying, you know, the government wants to control my right over my body. And I immediately phase off because I know that those are people who don't carry my values. Why? Because if I look outside the political platform, if I look at videos and I just look, well, how are you dressed today? I have seen these women in things that communicate to me that perhaps Christ is not the Lord over their body. And so if I am the one who values Christ as the Lord over my body, I'm not going to listen to rhetoric from anyone who doesn't quite value Christ as the Lord over their body. Look, there are times I have gone shopping, gone online, and I bought things. I saw things on a model and it looked beautiful. Then the item comes to me and I put the item on and it looks beautiful. But because my body is different from the model, it's sexy in a way that I didn't think would be sexy. Do I like the way it looks? Yes. Does my husband like the way it looks? Yes. But can I go outside my house with that outfit as someone who says Christ must be the Lord over my body, and the way my body is treated, what I put on my body must reflect his lordship, especially in the public sphere. As someone who thinks that way, that outfit's got to go. Okay? So when it comes to the rhetoric, and this is, if seeing celebrities on stage has moved you in any way and you are a Christian, I will knock on your door, knock. If you're looking at the words of celebrities and you're letting the words of celebrities influence the way you vote and influence the things you believe, please pay attention. Do those celebrities exercise Christ is my Lord? I didn't say, do those celebrities believe in God? I didn't say, are those celebrities spiritual? I'm not going to comment on anyone's Christianity. It's not my place. Okay? But if I see that the way a woman carries herself, the things that she puts on her body doesn't reflect the lordship of Christ, I cannot expect the things that she allows in her body to also reflect the lordship of Christ. These may be hard words to hear, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. Here's the other thing, though. Also on the topic of women's reproductive rights. I started to pay a whole lot more attention to the language behind women's reproductive rights in the year that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Okay? And I saw footage of people on Instagram having ballistic expressions, ballistic manifestations of anger and spite and hate because of this Roe v. Wade being overturned. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? Having grown up in America, I've read about Roe v. Wade in high school social studies books. But really, who is this Roe that we're talking about? Who is this Roe that we're fighting about? And the things that I learned actually made me uncomfortable. Roe, Jane Roe is not is a code name for the real person. Her real name is Norma McCorvey. And she was a woman that didn't necessarily have it easy in life. And this baby that was in contention in the Roe v. Wade case was actually her third after she had given two up for adoption. And she had this third baby in her body and she wanted to abort the baby. All she was looking for was an abortion. However, the law of the land where she was at that time restricted abortion only to cases where there's rape, there's incest, or there's a life-threatening issue that pregnancy would cause for the woman carrying that pregnancy. She didn't have any of those cases. So she created a premise, right? There are a couple of things that happened. This story is a whole lot more mumble-jumbled, and if you're interested, I will invite you to go research on it. However, this woman, one of the premises of her arguments, I don't believe this premise went forward into the court case, but she actually tried to lie and say that I want an abortion and I should get an abortion because I was pregnant from a rape by a gang of Black men. And so I read that story and I say, Roe v. Wade has nothing to do with freedom. Roe v. Wade has nothing to do with a woman's right. Roe v. Wade has everything to do with racism, classism, and opportunism. And if you pay attention to this woman's story, this story that got us to this place where this law is written into the land and its overturning creates uproar, has nothing to do with a woman's right. So for me, I read that and I think, well, why can I support something that's really not about my rights? That's just me. And by the way, why should I support something whose premise actually criminalizes people like me, Black men? Why should I do that? Be informed, people. Okay? Here's the other side of that coin, though. For people out there who think we should be living in a land where abortion should be made a criminal offense, where abortion should be restricted, there is a conversation about what a woman can do with her body to be had. I'm a storyteller, so I play things out in my mind in different ways. Right? Right now, the story that we're telling is, we want the government, the story that supporters of anti-abortion laws are saying is, we want the government to say a woman cannot have an abortion. Okay, fine. What if time passes on and there are people in the world that want to push a theory that the only babies allowed to live should be babies whose genetic composition is perfect? What if? And what if somebody, I'm saying something dangerous here and I know it, but what if some people that want to push this theory are able to get facts and data about how the world would be a better place and people would be richer and people would be happier if the only babies allowed to live are babies with perfect genetic composition? What would they try to do? They would try to use the government to control whether a woman who is having a child that doesn't fit a perfect genetic composition, whether she can decide to carry that pregnancy to the end or not. If we want to establish a premise now, this is my belief. If we want to establish a premise now that the government can say you cannot commit an abortion, you better believe that in the future, if we have something in the land, an air, something in the zeitgeist that completely switches the other way and says we do want babies, but only perfect babies, better believe the government will have the same right to write into law that, hey, now it's not just that we're restricting abortion, we're restricting the birth of babies with imperfect genetic compositions. If you've ever watched the movie Gattaca, Gattaca, Gattaca is a little bit of what I'm talking about. Gattaca was a futuristic, utopian, or dystopian world where the only people allowed access to certain things, certain careers, certain level of finances, etc., were people with a perfect genetic composition: blonde hair, blue eyes, skinny, white. Okay, so know that now, if we allow the government, right, if we set a precedent that the government can write into law what a woman is allowed to do with her body, what a woman is allowed to keep in her body. If there's anyone in the future that wants to write into law that, oh, by the way, the only individual, the only type of entity, being that is allowed in a woman's body is a child with a perfect genetic composition, you better believe they will use the government's ability to write out abortion as a precedent to take the law in that direction. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to stop that conversation and that argument. That's my thought. Here's the other side of that coin, though. A lot of times the topic about abortion is essentially about punishing the sinful woman. She had sex. Now she is experiencing the repercussions and the consequences of sex, which is a baby. Let's not make it easy for her to just get rid of the inconvenience of pregnancy. If we're able to put this law down into play and say, okay, no more abortions, that doesn't curb the appetite for sex. That doesn't curb the amount of women who will be having sex premaritally or within marriage and wanting to get rid of the baby. That doesn't curb rapes. It doesn't curb incest. It doesn't curb anything. It doesn't curb anything around sexual activity, right? So people will still go ahead and find ways to commit that abortion. I actually don't think this topic of abortion should be on a federal ballot. I don't. But I just want us to think from that perspective. And I'm having this conversation with individuals who are using abortion as the only way to vote. I think either way it goes, there will still be abortions. There will still be premarital sex. There will still be women who have sex and don't want babies. And this is actually where I bring my own perspective now. This is where church people, if you are really church people, stop fighting for the government to fix an area where you're supposed to be doing your work. I think if the church is really the church, we would be people who are actually putting ourselves in front of young women who have had sex and are considering abortions, or young women who have been raped and are considering abortions, or young women who have experienced incest and are considering abortions. We would be putting ourselves in front of them strategically to communicate the love of Christ, to give them actual support, not just prayers, but actual support, and to ensure they've gotten all they can to be able to decide clearly about whether or not they want to move forward with an abortion or not. I think if the church is actually the church, that is what our conversations would be. We're not having those conversations. And I think that's a failure on our part as a church. That's just my perspective. Here are the other things that are important. Family support and parental rights. I love looking at the Democrats' platform and seeing a need for protective gun laws. I'm sorry, but I'm tired of looking at the news and seeing high school students, middle school students, running out of their classroom in terror because they've just seen someone try to take their lives. I'm tired of it. It needs to stop. This is something that is uniquely American, and it needs to stop. Okay? Actually, as I look at the Republican platform and their words, they say nothing about protecting children in schools and protecting children in schools and protecting against gun laws. However, what I do see is this, that they want to cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. As a parent, I believe it is my right to inform my child's sexuality, to inform their ideas about gender. I don't believe it is a school's right. I don't believe it is a school teacher's right. Any platform that will stand against my right to be that person, my God-given right, I believe, to be that person, is not a platform worth support. That's my own perspective. Last one in terms of my core values was innovation and entrepreneurship. I see things about innovation and entrepreneurship on both sides, right? You have to read these platforms and the way they speak about innovation and business. And I think this is important because Nigerians, we are entrepreneurial. We are go-getters. We do have an aggression about us. We do come here and we start ministries and we start businesses and we start foundations. And we want the absolute best economic environment political environments, social environments, be able to start those things. Both parties do have some words around innovation and some words around entrepreneurship. Read them on your own. That's what I'm going to say. We're running out of time. Read them on your own and really decide for yourself. If I'm someone who has the desire to be an entrepreneur, the desire to be a visionary in some way, shape, or form, or I already am that entrepreneur and visionary in some way, shape, or form. If I am that person, which platform's ideology towards business and entrepreneurship will create for me the environment that will help me do that in the best way possible? Guys, what I have just shown you is how to take yourself, understand your values, pay attention to the candidates, but also the platforms that they're standing on. I think the question is to ask yourself is how well do these candidates and platform create a nation that helps me to purport these values in the best way possible? That's a decision you have to make for yourself, but please let it be an informed decision, okay? And that being said, I want to close this episode with a survival kit for you, a voting survival kit, Nigerian style. My dear Nigerians who can vote here in the US, when you go to vote, I'm not saying if, I'm saying when you go to vote, this is your survival kit on how to survive the voting process. All right, this is going to be quick and we will end the podcast here. Here we go. Here's the first one. Sit down, where, and check the ballot. All right? Take a moment to sit down, look over the entire ballot, research what each platform is saying, research your candidates, and then go out so that you are voting with confidence and not guessing and not playing any mini mani mo tic-tac-toe. Okay? This is especially important if you live in a state that is considered a swing state. All right? They go back and forth. One year they support a Republican. One year they support a Democrat. Your vote is extremely important. Tip number 2, decode the political big grammar. Okay? Don't let the big grammar phase you. Words like pandering, phrases like swing states. Figure them out. The quickest way to figure them out, go on ChatGPT. Just say, ChatGPT, what does this mean? Google is your friend as well. Tip number 3, fuel up. If you like to fuel up with jollof rice, fuel up with jollof rice. I mean, eat a big meal, a good meal before you go and vote. I went to vote and I was standing for 30 minutes. 30 minutes is not bad, okay? But this was early voting. I don't know what it's going to be like on election day, so make sure you fuel up with a plate of some good food. If it's rice, it's rice. If it's vegan, something, 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 it's vegan, something, something, something. Just fuel up. All right? Tip number 4. Manage your family WhatsApp. Guys, I am getting a whole bunch of stuff from WhatsApp. And unfortunately, some people are not so great at, people sometimes are not so great at filtering what is true or false when they forward you messages on WhatsApp. I'm just going to ask, turn those filters off. Filter out your WhatsApp. If you need to mute certain channels on your WhatsApps coming from Nigeria, coming from UK, coming from Canada, coming from wherever, mute them. But make sure when you mute them, you do tip number 1, which is do your research. All right. Last tip, connect with fellow people like you. Fellow people who have the same values you have. Fellow people who have the same Nigerian-influenced identity as you have. And hear from them. Like, what's important to you? And how does that influence your ballot? You never know how that educates you, right? But let these be people you trust. And go ahead and have those conversations. It doesn't have to be something you do in isolation. I do think you have to be a responsible, independent researcher, but the entire voting process does not have to be something you do in isolation. All right, my friends, this has been a different type of Dear Nigerians podcast episode. I hope you found it helpful, and I want to thank you. If you stayed with me to the end of this episode, I thank you. You can leave my couch now. I'm joking. I'll see you next time in the next episode of Dear Nigerians. We say goodbye.